Hi there. Welcome to another episode of West Meets East. On the last topic I wanted to talk about with money is something that's a little specific to Vietnam, maybe other countries in Southeast Asia, not so much in East Asia. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Southeast Asia is way more Buddhist than, say, like South Korea, which is almost 35% Christian. And only, I think, 17% Buddhist, and supposedly the rest are atheists or non-denominational. Um, so one of the things that Hui and I fight about um, in regards to money is him actually giving money away, particularly to people who are living on the streets. And that is true whether it's in Vietnam or if it's here either in the United States. I can't tell you the number of times we've been on the motorbike driving through Saigon and we will swerve across 5 lanes of traffic to stop and give money to a monk who is walking by, with a basket. And, being the New Yorker that I am and growing up around the city and living in the city for a few years, you get approached a lot of times by people asking for money, and it can get exhausting, and you sort of become a little immune to it and desensitized and suspicious, you know. And there are some scams in Vietnam where people dress up as monks and pretend to be a monk so people will give them money. And I try to tell that to Hui, but he doesn't care. And here's somebody who I mentioned earlier, grew up incredibly poor, yet will gladly give away money to people who need it more than he does. And this is a very, very specific thing to Vietnam that I like a lot, that the Vietnamese will help each other out. If somebody on the block, and everybody lives very communally in the neighborhood, is having a hard time, people will pool together money, or they'll bring over food, or they'll do some chores for them, and they will help out their neighbors. In the West, we're not so sensitive to the needs of others, which is really kind of ironic considering how much more wealthy we are. And sometimes I feel bad because I do give to charity, but I like to give to charities that I know are legitimate charities. So I will donate directly to charities that are LLCs, and I know the money's going to the right place. Some of the negativity that gets into my head when I'm giving money to homeless people is, where is this going? Is this going to help your family, or is it just going to, support a drug habit? I know that sounds terrible, but, that's kind of what happens when you live in a major city like New York. And, there were times when I lived in New York that I would actually offer to buy people food, and they would look at me like I was crazy. Like, well, I don't want food, just give me the money. And, so in Asia, though, because of the influence of Buddhism, material things are not important in Buddhism, and sharing and helping others is. As I said, this is really more particular to Southeast Asia. I mean, in Korea, you actually didn't see many panhandlers in Korea. And, even though Buddhism is only 17%, it's still a very Christian country. So there are a lot of Christians in Korea who are giving money to their churches. And I grew up Catholic. But I used to resent it when I was a teenager, as they passed that plate around the church, asking for money. And I understand that it was supposed to support the church, but even then I would ask, where is this money going? And I don't know if that's a Western thing. I would welcome other people in the West, or is it just me being selfish and a jerk? I don't know. I do know a lot of it has to do with Hui being incredibly generous and way more generous than me. And this isn't something that I should really fight with him about, but sometimes it used to piss me off. Um, because, and he wasn't giving a lot of money. I mean, come on. In Vietnam, he would probably give the equivalent of less than $1. Um, but it was just something that we would usually disagree about. And, you know, I understand when you come from something so poor that you hate to see others who are in need, and that makes sense. And he is a pretty devout Buddhist. It's funny, his family is a large family, and some are Catholic. His dad was Catholic, and the other half are Buddhist. Um, and yet they're all very similar in terms of their generosity. And again, so I think this tends to be more of a Vietnamese trait. I would be curious if it's common in other Asian countries as well. But yeah, so on the one hand, Hui can be very cheap about buying things for himself for money, but on the other hand, he'll gladly give away money to those in need. And that always felt like a little bit of a dichotomy to me. And as I said, money is, when you travel through Asia, especially as a white guy, money can really be something that you're going to confront every day. I remember going to Cambodia, and I went to Siem Reap to see Angkor Wat. And I would go to the temples, which were fantastic. By the way, if you've never been to Angkor Wat, it's life-changing. But every time you exited one of the temples, you were inundated by people trying to sell bracelets or waters or, handmade trinkets. And I traveled with my boyfriend at the time, who was Indonesian. They did not go up to him to ask him to buy. They went up to me, and they would swarm around you like locusts. And you try to be polite, you try to be polite, you try to be polite. And then if you didn't buy anything, I was verbally abused, chased, and yelled at because I didn't buy anything. And, this was always something that would happen to me in poorer nations. And it can be off-putting. It's not so bad in Vietnam. They don't force you to buy things. Well, a little bit in Hoi An, but after I lived there for a couple of months and they recognized me, they knew I wasn't going to go in their shops. Anyway, just be aware of that money is looked at very differently when you're traveling through Asia, and don't get mad at like what I call the white price. If you're going to go to a market in Vietnam or Thailand, you're going to get charged more. You're not a local. And, even what they're charging you is still ridiculously low. It never bothered me, but it bothers some white tourists to no end. My advice is sort of get over it. You could afford it. But, all right, that's all I wanted to talk about money. A couple more topics probably for him, but then I'm going to start getting into the biggest of all topics, which is communication. And that one I'm probably going to have to split up into 3 or 4 separate topics, because I could talk about that for 20 minutes. And I do try to keep my discussions under 10 minutes. So as always, I hope that you like and subscribe and share. My following is growing, but pretty slow, but that's okay. I mean, I know it takes time. So we're in a long sleeve today because it's freezing here in Maine. Anyway, thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.